Nobody saw it fall. On the 49th floor of a glass tower in Seoul, a white envelope lies on polished marble between a pair of worn cleaning shoes and the closed doors of a VIP elevator. A young black maid in a blue uniform bends down, fingers trembling, cheeks still burning from the slap she took 10 minutes ago. Inside the envelope, $5,000 in crisp foreign bills, still warm from the hand that dropped them. The hand of a man the staff only mention in whispers. The man in the black suit with the neck tattoo, whose shadow just disappeared behind those elevator doors. There are no cameras in this blind corner. Her supervisor is drunk in the staff lounge. The night guard is scrolling his phone, half asleep. For Esther, this money is 3 months of hospital bills for a brother whose kidneys are failing, one more chance before the clinic quietly erases his name from the transplant list. Keeping it would be easy. No one would ever know. Except she knows exactly whose envelope it is. Moments ago, she watched him take a call and hear 4 words that changed his face completely. The leak is inside. Now she has 60 seconds before his elevator reaches the underground garage and his black sedan vanishes into the city. 60 seconds to decide whether she will steal from a mafia boss already hunting a traitor, or chase him into streets maids are warned to avoid. If you've ever told yourself you'd do the right thing when nobody was watching, stay with me. What this maid does next won't just decide if her brother lives long enough to be saved. It will force a crime king to confront the people his world steps over every day, and reveal that someone Esther trusts has already sold her name. To understand why a girl hired to scrub other people's floors ran toward the most feared man in the building instead of away from him, we need to rewind to the day she first put on that blue uniform. Before we continuing this thrilling story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Where are you watching from? Like, comment and share. When Esther first saw Seoul, it was through a bus window streaked with tired rain. Neon signs blurred past in colors she didn't know how to pronounce. Her suitcase was a borrowed one, its broken wheel scraping along the pavement when the agency handler marched her into a cramped office above a convenience store. They slid a contract in front of her, pages thick with Korean and tiny English paragraphs. Cleaning, accommodation, food, good salary, the woman said, tapping the signature line. You sign, you work, easy. It wasn't easy. The words about overtime, penalties, and housing deductions were wrapped in legal language she couldn't untangle. Esther thought of her brother's face on a low-resolution video call, the way he tried to hide his pain so she wouldn't worry. She signed. Days blurred into each other. She woke before dawn in a shared room with 3 other women, changed into the blue uniform and rode a staff van from one glossy building to another. When she moved too slowly, a supervisor barked at her, fingers digging into her arm. When she asked about missing wages, they waved a copy of the contract she could barely read and reminded her of the fees they'd kindly advanced. Every night she found a corner of weak Wi-Fi and called home. The clinic wanted more money. Her brother joked about hospital food, but his voice was thinner each week. Esther smiled into the cracked screen, promising that Seoul was full of opportunity, that things would get better soon. After the call ended, she counted what little she had left and set her alarm for another shift. Then came the assignment that changed everything, Skyline Palace. From the outside it looked like a glass blade stabbed into the sky, floors of light stacked above the city. On the inside it smelled of marble and money. Residents glided past in designer coats, eyes fixed on their phones. To them the blue uniforms were just moving background. In the service corridors the real stories travelled in whispers. Cooks, guards and cleaners spoke softly about the man upstairs, the one who never waited for elevators, the one whose arrival emptied hallways. Esther heard his name for the first time in the staff canteen, spoken over metal trays. Gu Chan. Her first glimpse of him was a reflection before it was a man. Black suit, straight shoulders, slicked back hair, and a dark pattern curling up the side of his neck, caught in the polished steel of an elevator door. By the time she turned to look, he was already stepping inside, 2 silent men in matching suits at his back. No one said hello. No one breathed until the doors slid shut. Esther lowered her eyes and pushed her cart past. She told herself he had nothing to do with her life. She was wrong. By the time the clock on the staff room wall said 9 p.m., Esther's day had already gone wrong 3 different ways. It started with payroll. The other maids lined up in the narrow corridor, hands out for envelopes thinner than they should have been. When Esther opened hers, the numbers didn't add up. Days were missing. Hours had vanished. She took a breath, stepped toward the supervisor and held out the pay slip. "There's a mistake," she said quietly. "Last week I worked." The woman didn't even look at the paper. Her palm cracked across Esther's cheek with practiced efficiency, not hard enough to bruise deep, just enough to sting and warn. "You think you count better than the office," she snapped. "You want trouble with immigration. Be grateful you have work." Heat flooded Esther's face. Every instinct told her to answer back. The memory of her brother in a hospital bed told her to swallow it. She bowed her head, whispered an apology she didn't mean, and went back to her cart. An hour later, on the 42nd floor, a resident in silk pointed to a faint streak on the mirror, nothing more than a missed swipe of cloth, and complained as if Esther had vandalized the place. The supervisor appeared again, lips thin, and in front of the open door scolded her loudly about standards and lazy hands. "Since you like heights so much," the woman hissed afterward, "you clean the 52nd tonight, all of it." The 52nd floor, the highest residential level, the one the staff avoided if they could, everyone knew who lived there. The private elevator hummed softly as it carried Esther and her cart upward. When the doors slid open, the air felt different, quieter. The corridor stretched out in smooth marble and soft light, lined with just a handful of heavy doors. One of them at the very end bore no nameplate, no doorbell, just a small, brushed steel panel and a camera eye. She set to work, kneeling to scrub a scuff that probably no one would have seen. Her cheek still pulsed with each heartbeat. As she moved her cloth in slow circles, the steel door at the end clicked. Gu Chan stepped out, phone pressed to his ear. Tailored black suit, dark hair pulled straight back, the ink at his neck disappearing beneath his collar. He didn't glance at her. His gaze was turned inward, focused on the voice coming through the line. Whoever was speaking made his jaw tighten. His steps, at first unhurried, faltered for half a second, then his tone dropped. "What do you mean, inside?" he said in Korean, words clipped. "You told me it was external, say it clearly." He listened, eyes narrowing, then spoke again, quieter, more dangerous. "Find out who, now." Without another word, he started toward the elevator. The two men who waited by his door fell in behind him, shoes silent on the marble. Esther froze beside her bucket, eyes on the floor, but the words lodged themselves in her mind. Inside, someone close, someone trusted. The elevator doors slid open at the end of the hall. Gu Chan stepped in, still on the call, one hand sliding into his jacket. As he did, something slipped free and hit the ground with the softest thud. A white envelope, thick and heavy, landed near the threshold. None of them noticed. Not the boss, not his men. The doors closed on black fabric and a flash of tattoo, and the elevator began its descent. Left behind, in the quiet corridor, Esther stared at the envelope lying alone on the marble. For a long moment, Esther didn't move. The envelope lay between her and the elevator, edges too sharp, too clean, like it didn't belong in the same world as her cracked hands and cheap shoes. She glanced up and down the corridor. No residents, no guards. The tiny camera over Gu Chan's door was angled toward the entrance, not the floor where she knelt. She wiped her palms on her uniform and picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. The flap wasn't sealed all the way. One corner gaped just enough for a glimpse of green and off-white. She told herself not to look. Her fingers disobeyed. A small tug, a breath, and the contents slid just enough for her to see. Stacks of bills, dollars, not one. She counted 1, 2, 3 bands before her hands started to shake. She didn't need to know the exact total. 5,000, maybe more. More money than she had earned in months of scrubbing other people's floors. In her mind, the corridor vanished. She saw a metal hospital bed back home, her brother's thin arm resting on top of a grey blanket. She heard the doctor's voice on a bad line, explaining that if the special fee wasn't paid, the committee would have to reconsider priorities. She remembered her own account balance, a number too small to save anyone. With this envelope, the fee was nothing. She could wire it tomorrow. She could buy him time. She could pay the agency debt and walk away from the supervisor's hand forever, change buildings, change jobs, disappear. Then a different picture forced itself in. The man in the elevator, shoulders rigid, voice like ice. The leak is inside. Someone had betrayed him, someone close enough to be dangerous. Whatever this money was for, it mattered. If it went missing, they wouldn't shrug. They would look. They would ask who was nearby. On the 52nd floor, there was only one answer, the maid in the blue uniform. She imagined keeping it, a few weeks of relief followed by a knock on the staff dorm door, a van ride where the windows didn't open, no calls home, no explanation. She imagined returning it, running into a world she didn't understand, straight toward a man people were afraid to name out loud. The elevator panel at the end of the corridor blinked softly, the numbers counting down, 49, 48, as it carried Gu Chan toward the underground garage. She didn't have time to weigh every angle. 60 seconds, maybe less, before he was gone. Esther shoved the envelope under her arm, grabbed the handle of her cart, then abandoned it halfway to the service elevator. There was no way she could push all that metal fast enough. She slammed the staff elevator button with her thumb, heart pounding to the rhythm of the descending numbers on the other shaft. The doors opened. She stepped inside, hit B2 with more force than necessary, and felt the lurch in her stomach as the car dropped. In the underground garage, she arrived just in time to see the back of a black sedan pulling out of a reserved space, taillights glowing like watchful eyes. 2 more dark cars followed behind it. No license plates she could read at this distance, only tinted windows and sleek paint. Common sense told her to stop. Instead, she ran. She burst through the staff exit onto the loading ramp, lungs burning, and watched the convoy's lights merge into the thin stream of late-night traffic. A delivery scooter waited nearby, engine idling. The young rider glanced at her, then at the cars. "Where are they going?" she gasped, pointing. He shrugged, then jerked his chin toward the river. Those plates, warehouses by the water, always the same. It was all she needed. She sprinted to the street, hailed the first taxi that braked hard enough not to hit her, and tumbled into the back seat, still clutching the envelope. "Follow those cars," she said, voice shaking. "Please, I'll pay." The driver looked at her uniform, at her empty hands, and raised an eyebrow. Then he saw the edge of the thick envelope in her grip, and without another question, pressed his foot to the accelerator. They trailed the convoy through narrower streets, past neon signs and shuttered shops, until the city lights thinned and the road curved along the dark line of the river. Metal skeletons of warehouses rose ahead, their windows black. The cars turned in through a rusted gate and vanished behind corrugated walls. The taxi stopped a block away. Esther paid with everything in her small wallet, slipped out and pressed herself into the shadow of a stacked shipping container. The cold bit through her uniform. Voices floated from the open warehouse door, low and tense. She held the envelope tighter against her chest and watched. From her hiding place behind the cold metal of the container, Esther could see just enough. The warehouse door yawned open, spilling a rectangle of harsh light onto the cracked concrete. Inside, men in dark coats stood in a loose half-circle, the kind of loose that only looks relaxed until someone moves wrong. In the center was Gu Chan. No entourage now, no polished lobby. Just him, hands at his sides, shoulders square, phone gone. His voice carried, even though he wasn't shouting. "You told me the leak was outside," he said in Korean, each word measured. "That customs was the problem, that rival crews were listening. Today, 3 of my routes were blocked before my people even left the docks." One of the lieutenants shifted his weight, swallowed. Another avoided his eyes, pretending to study the floor. Esther couldn't follow every word, but she understood tone. This was a man who had run out of patience. "If someone inside is selling pieces of my house," he continued, "I want his name now." Silence answered him. Then everything happened at once. A sound like fireworks cracked from the far side of the yard. The air split. Bullets punched into the warehouse wall, showering dust. Someone shouted. Men dove for cover. The lieutenant who'd been looking at the floor suddenly had a gun in his hand, firing toward the open bay door as shadows moved outside. Esther dropped instinctively, the container's metal biting into her palms. The envelope nearly slipped from her grip. Shouts ricocheted off metal and concrete. A car engine roared closer, then braked hard. More shots. Glass exploded, raining down in glittering fragments. Through the chaos, she saw one of the attackers swing toward the yard. His eyes swept across the shadows, hunting. They snagged on the flash of blue from her uniform, the white corner of the envelope clutched to her chest. His gun turned. In that heartbeat, absurd thoughts collided in her mind. If she ran, he'd shoot her in the back. If she stayed crouched, he'd shoot anyway. No one inside knew she was there. No one would hear her fall. Her body moved faster than her fear. She lurched to her feet, heart punching at her ribs, and lifted the envelope high above her head. Fingers spread so the white paper caught the warehouse light. "It's yours," she screamed in shaky Korean, voice tearing in the cold air. "It's your money, I came to return it." For a fraction of a second, everything stuttered. The shooter's eyes flicked from her face to the envelope. Someone inside the warehouse cursed in surprise. A head snapped toward the door. Then the gunman's finger tightened. A shot rang out, but not from his weapon. His body jerked backward, a dark bloom staining his shoulder as he dropped to the ground, gun skittering away across the concrete. The echo of the shot rolled through the yard, followed by a new voice, low and unmistakable. "Down," Gu-chan snapped. Esther felt a hand seize the back of her uniform and yank her sideways just as another bullet chewed into the shipping container where her head had been. She stumbled, fell hard against a stack of crates inside the warehouse, the envelope crushed between them. Gu-chan crouched in front of her, gun still raised toward the yard, eyes flaring once over her face, taking in the uniform, the terror, the envelope now crumpled in her fist. "She's with us," he said curtly to the men who had swung their weapons toward her. "Touch her and you answer to me." The gunfire outside began to fade as engines revved and retreating tires squealed against concrete. Someone shouted that the attackers were pulling back, the air filled with the bitter smell of smoke and dust. Only when the last shot echoed off the river did Gu-chan lower his pistol. He stood, breathing steady, and looked down at Esther. "You," he said, voice flat but edged with something she couldn't name, "the maid from the 52nd floor." She swallowed, throat dry, and opened her hand. The battered envelope lay there, damp with sweat. "You dropped this," she managed, "in the hallway." Around them, his lieutenants stared as if she had spoken in another language. Gu-chan's gaze flicked to the envelope, then back to her eyes. "Bring her," he told his men. "Alive, we have questions." They put her in the back seat, not the trunk. That was the first surprise. The car door shut with a soft, final sound. City lights slid across the tinted glass as they pulled away from the river, turning gunmetal and water into smears of gold. Esther sat rigid, hands clasped around the envelope resting on her lap, uniform still dusted with warehouse grit. Across from her, Gu-chan watched in silence. No bodyguards crowded the back. They were up front, a low murmur between driver and passenger. Here it was just the boss and the maid, the air between them thick with questions neither had chosen. "Name," he said at last. "Esther," she whispered. Her voice sounded small in the leather-lined space. "You work at Skyline Palace, cleaning." She nodded. "You followed my cars tonight. Why?" She looked down at the crushed envelope. "You dropped this," she said. "On the 52nd floor I thought you would need it." "You opened it." It wasn't a question. Shame and stubbornness collided inside her. "Yes," she admitted. "I needed to know if it was real. My brother is sick. The hospital wants money we don't have. I could have kept it." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I didn't." One of the men in front let out a soft scoff. Gu-chan raised a hand and the sound died. "Your brother," he said. "Where?" She told him. The country she'd left, the clinic that asked for fees, the agency deductions that never quite matched what she'd been promised, the slap in the corridor that morning. Her words came out flat like a report, but her fingers twisted in the fabric of her skirt. He listened without interrupting, gaze steady, as if weighing each sentence, filing it away. When she finished, the car fell quiet again. The city thinned outside the windows, replaced by wider roads and darker outlines of trees. By the time they turned through tall gates and rolled up a long, shadowed drive, the men in front had already received the results of their own search. A phone buzzed, a message was read aloud in clipped phrases. No criminal record, no debts except to the agency, family confirmed, brother's medical reports forwarded. "Clean," the man summarized, "desperate but clean." The car stopped. Gu-chan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, bringing his face level with hers. "I don't like loose ends," he said evenly. "You saw too much tonight, but you also walked into a firefight carrying money you could have stolen and vanished with. That makes you useful and dangerous." Her heartbeat hammered in her ears. "I will clear your brother's overdue bills," he continued. "Not through your clinic, through a better hospital. He will stay on the list, that is the first thing." She blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "In return, you work for me, not the agency. Here." He nodded toward the house looming outside, all stone and glass and guarded light. "You will be alive in aid. You clean my house, serve in my meetings when told, and keep your eyes open. You will be paid properly. You send money home without the agency touching it. And if I say no, The question slipped out before she could stop it. He held her gaze, no anger, just cold fact. You already stepped into my world when you followed that envelope, he said. There is no that takes you back to before tonight. The only choice you have is how close you stand to me when trouble comes again. He straightened, opened the door, and let in the night air. Remember this, Esther, he added, his voice quiet now. Loyalty here is rewarded, betrayal is not discussed, it is erased. She climbed out of the car, clutching the empty envelope, and followed him toward the house that would change everything. They didn't hand her a uniform and throw her into the deep end. Not here. In Gu Chan's house the blue dress stayed, but everything else changed. An older woman named Mrs. Han, who ran the household like a quiet general, taught Esther where she could walk, when she could speak, and when she had to become a shadow. Doors she was never to open, rooms she was never to linger in, faces she was to memorize but never greet unless greeted first. People tell the truth when they think you're furniture, Mrs. Han told her one morning, adjusting the angle of Esther's tray. Stand, listen, see, then forget everything unless the boss asks. Soon, Esther found herself standing in corners of rooms she would never have been allowed to enter before, boardrooms with floor-to-ceiling glass, private dining rooms overlooking the river. She poured tea, refilled glasses, wiped away invisible crumbs. And watched. She noticed how one lieutenant always checked his phone when a particular shipping company was mentioned, how another laughed too loudly at jokes about customs inspections, then drank too fast afterward, how, during a late meeting, a man paused just a fraction too long before denying he'd spoken to a rival crew. She didn't think these details mattered until Gu Chan asked, casually, over an empty cup, "Who looked nervous when I said we'd move the Friday shipment?" She told him just observations, hands shaking, eyes avoiding his, a phone screen lit under the table at the wrong moment. 2 nights later, that shipment took a different route. The ambush waiting on the original road found nothing but darkness and cold air. The man whose hands had shaken didn't return to the house. No one said his name, no one explained. Mrs. Han simply reassigned Esther's duties and told her to wash the glasses from that last meeting. As she stood at the sink, the weight of it settled on her. A few words she'd spoken had shifted the ground under someone's feet, and then he was gone. Between shifts, when she came back to Skyline Palace to oversee Gu Chan's apartment, Esther started to cling to small, ordinary kindness wherever she could find it. On the 38th floor, a resident in a soft cardigan often stopped her in the corridor. "You work too hard," the woman would say, pressing a tangerine or a warm bun into her hand. "Do you have family here? You can talk to me, you know." Her voice was gentle. Her smile reached her eyes. She asked about Esther's brother, about home, about which guards were nice, and which ones made life difficult for the staff. After days of stone faces and quiet threats, that warmth felt like a patch of sunlight on a cold floor. Esther took the food, said thank you, and told herself it was safe to answer a few harmless questions. The smell of smoke reached the house before he did. It clung to his coat, faint but unmistakable, when Gu Chan stepped through the front door just after midnight. His shirt was open at the collar, one sleeve darkened where blood had dried in an uneven stain. Not enough to slow his stride, just enough to mark that tonight had gone close to a line. The guards hovered at a distance, waiting for orders. Mrs. Han appeared, took in the scene with one quick glance and said only, "I'll bring the kit," before turning away. Esther, who had been wiping down the quiet dining room, froze with the cloth in her hand. Their eyes met for a second. He nodded toward the side room. Inside, the lights were softer. He sat on the edge of a low sofa and rolled his sleeve up without ceremony. The cut on his forearm was shallow, a jagged line where something had grazed him. There was a bruise starting along his ribs where a blow had landed. Nothing fatal, nothing that would make the news, the kind of damage his world called nothing. Mrs. Han set the antiseptic and bandages down and looked at Esther. "You clean carefully," she said. "You can do this." Her hands were steady even though her heart was not. She dabbed at the blood with gauze, watching his face for any sign of pain. He didn't flinch. "It was supposed to be a meeting," he said quietly, as if continuing a conversation they hadn't started. "Old friend, someone I grew up with, we used to share everything, streets, food, fights." Esther didn't answer. The room felt like a held breath. "He took money to sell my roots," Gu Chan went on. "Thought I wouldn't find out, thought history would protect him." He looked down at the dark smear on the gauze. It didn't. The meaning hung there, heavy and simple. Esther taped the bandage in place, then stepped back. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked before she could stop herself, deciding what to do with people. He studied her. "No," he said, "it gets quieter." She swallowed. "I'm not afraid of your house," she said. "Or even of you. I'm afraid of waking up one day and not feeling anything when someone disappears because I said their hands were shaking." For the first time that night, something like surprise flickered in his eyes, then a shadow of respect. "If that day comes," he said softly, "you stop working for me." "If I try to stop and you don't let me?" she asked. A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Then we will argue," he said, loudly. The joke was small, but it broke the air between them. For a brief moment, he looked like a man carrying weight, not just a figure in a black suit. The moment ended with the vibration of her phone in her apron pocket. She glanced at the screen, the clinic's number, her chest tightened. "I have to take this," she murmured. In the hallway, under the dim light, she pressed the phone to her ear. The doctor's voice was brisk, remote. Tests had worsened. Her brother's condition was deteriorating faster than expected. If they wanted to keep him at the front of the line, additional payments would be required. Soon. "How much?" she asked. The answer made her knees feel weak. When she returned to the room, her face was composed, but her fingers twisted the edge of her apron. "Bad news," Gu Chan said, not as a question. She nodded once. "They want more," she replied. "Soon, more than I can ever earn cleaning anything." He leaned back, eyes narrowing, calculating something she couldn't see. "Then we find a different way," he said quietly, "before they run out of excuses." The solution came faster than she expected, and from a direction she never imagined would open for someone like her. 2 days after the late-night call from the clinic, a different number rang. A nurse with a softer voice explained that Esther's brother had been transferred. No extra fee, no threats. A sponsor had arranged for his case to be moved to a larger hospital in another country, where a specialist team would take over. Travel, tests, treatment, already covered. Esther ended the call with her back against the pantry wall, phone pressed to her chest. There was only one person in her life who had that kind of reach and reason. That evening, in the quiet of his study, Gu Chan confirmed it with a single nod. "You work for me," he said. "You should not be wondering every night if your brother will still be breathing in the morning. Focus here, I'll handle there." Gratitude and fear knotted together inside her. "I can't repay this," she whispered. "You already started," he replied, "when you picked up that envelope." If the debt had been numbers before, it now felt like chains, not cruel ones but heavy all the same. A week later, the first message came, not to her but to him. A photo on his phone, the back of a woman in a blue uniform pushing a cleaning cart down a familiar corridor. No face, just the outline of a life. The caption beneath it was short. "We know what she looks like." Maury followed, a grainy shot from the staff entrance, a list of times when the foreign girl arrived and left. Each message was a finger running slowly down Esther's spine. "The leak isn't just in my crew," Gu Chan said, placing his phone on the table between them. "Someone is watching you, using you to measure my movements." They built a plan on that knowledge. Esther would follow her usual routine at Skyline Palace, morning shift in the lower floors, short break, then lunch hour on the 38th, where the staff corridor met the residence hall. His men would be watching the watchers, cameras, cars, faces that appeared whenever she did. "If they act, we trace where the signal goes," he said. "If they don't, we wait. Either way, you never walk alone." She wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe his reach could close every gap. But the next day, when she pushed her cart toward the staff corridor at the planned time, the hairs on her arms rose before she saw anyone. The hall was quieter than usual, too quiet, no other maids, no distant clatter from the service kitchen, just the hum of the lights and the squeak of her cart's wheel. She checked her watch, exactly on schedule. One more step, and she crossed the invisible line between the cameras in the main hall and the blind spot of the service passage. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind. An arm locked around her waist. The world tilted, and the blue of her uniform blurred into darkness. She woke to the sound of dripping water and buzzing lights. Concrete pressed against her spine. Her wrists ached when she tried to move, rope bit into her skin. The air was cold and damp, tasting faintly of rust and old oil. When Esther forced her eyes open, she saw peeling paint, a flickering strip light and a single metal chair in front of her. A man sat in it, legs crossed, phone in hand. He wasn't dressed like the men around Gu Chan. No tailored suit, no polished shoes. Just a dark jacket, a clean haircut, and eyes that didn't linger on anything longer than they had to. "So," he said in careful Korean, slipping the phone into his pocket, "the girl in the blue uniform, the one he keeps so close he moved a whole hospital for her brother." Her throat was too dry to answer. "You don't know me," he went on. "That's the point. My people stand beside his people at the docks and the clubs, but we work differently." He gestured around at the empty, echoing room. "We like assets we can move, assets that don't have papers anyone will miss." The door scraped behind her. Footsteps approached, measured and familiar. Esther didn't need to turn to know who it was. The resident from the 38th floor walked into view, cardigan replaced by a fitted coat, hair tied back, expression flat. The paper cup of tea she so often carried was gone. In its place was a tablet she handed to the man. "See," she said in the same gentle voice Esther knew from the corridor. "Perfect profile, no family here, weak point back home, boss likes them like this." The man tapped the screen, nodding. "You did well." She turned to Esther and smiled, but there was nothing warm in it now. "You really thought I was just being nice?" she asked softly. "You people always do. A snack, a few questions, and you give everything, which guards talk, which doors stay open, who walks where and when." Her eyes travelled over Esther's uniform like she was appraising an item on a shelf. "Maids are easy to replace," she added. "For the residents, one goes, another comes. For us, one sells, another buys, everyone eats." As they spoke, Esther let her gaze drift, not to avoid theirs but to map the room. One light overhead hanging by exposed wiring, a smoke detector on the ceiling, its cover missing, a metal shelf against the wall, cluttered with tools and a half-empty bottle of something flammable. The door, old wood reinforced with a newer steel bar, but the hinges were rusted, bolts eaten at the edges. Every small weakness, every loose piece she filed away. If she was going to get out of here alive, she would need more than fear and gratitude. She would need to do what she'd been trained to do in silence, see what everyone else ignored, and turn it into the only chance she had. They didn't bother tying her ankles. It was a small mistake, the kind people make when they've already decided how the story ends. Esther waited until the broker and the gang leader stepped toward the door, arguing about schedules and prices. Their backs turned for just a moment. She shifted her chair, scraping metal softly over concrete, inching closer to the shelf. Each movement was a calculation. How much noise before someone looked back, how much time before they grew bored and left her to guards. When their voices rose, she acted. Esther kicked the leg of the shelf as hard as she could. The tools rattled. The half-empty bottle toppled, rolling along the edge before crashing to the floor. Liquid splashed up, catching the dangling light and the exposed wiring above. She didn't need a spark, she needed panic. "Something burning," she shouted as loud as the rope at her wrists allowed. "I smell smoke." It wasn't entirely a lie. The bulb flickered, hissed, and a thin trail of grey began to curl from the frayed wire. The liquid on the floor started to glisten. One of the men cursed and rushed forward, knocking the chair sideways. The light flared, then popped. In the same breath, the old smoke detector in the corner woke up, shrieking. An instant later, overhead sprinklers sputtered to life, flooding the room in cold water. Somewhere deeper in the building, a larger alarm began to wail. For a building nobody was supposed to know about, its fire system was still connected to the city grid. While men shouted and slipped on the wet floor, while the broker shielded her tablet and swore, another signal quietly lit up across town. In a car outside, one of Gu Chan's people looked down at a secondary alert, an unregistered fire alarm at the same cell tower that had pinged Esther's phone earlier that day. "Found her," he said into his mic. Minutes later, the abandoned complex shook with a different kind of noise. Boots on stairs, doors kicked open, ordered voices cutting through the confusion. Esther lay on her side, soaked, heart hammering when the door burst inward. This time the black suits were hers. They moved fast, guns up but controlled. The gang leader went down with his hands forced behind his back. The broker tried to slip out through a side exit and ran straight into another of Gu Chan's men. Her gentle corridor smile had no use here. Gu Chan himself stepped into the room last. His hair was damp from the sprinklers, jacket discarded somewhere in the chaos. For a second, the dangerous man and the man who had signed hospital papers were both visible in his face. "Cut her loose," he ordered. Rope fell away. Esther tried to stand and nearly collapsed. He caught her elbow, steadying her. "You like alarms," he said, glancing up at the dripping ceiling. "They like to be listened to," she answered, voice shaking. Later, when the sirens had faded and the complex stood empty except for police tape and tired detectives, the real work began. Taken devices, phones, tablets. Encrypted drives, spilled open quiet maps, routes where vans had disappeared, names of officials paid to look away, lists of workers with no one to report them missing. Over the next months, investigations that never made the front page quietly closed those routes. A few officers were transferred so quickly they didn't have time to pack properly. The agency that owned Esther's first contract lost its biggest buildings to a new management company, whose director happened to sit across from Gu Chan at dinner more than once. In Skyline Palace, changes appeared in details. Cameras installed in the blind corners staff had complained about for years. New rules: no one could ask staff about security schedules, any attempt had to be reported. Contracts rewritten in plain language with translators present. On a mild afternoon, Esther stood in a side garden of Gu Chan's legal offices, tablet in hand, watching a team mount a discreet camera above a service entrance. Her clothes were different now, no blue dress, but a neat blouse and ID badge that said Security Liaison. People greeted her by name. Her phone buzzed, a video call. Her brother's face filled the screen, cheeks finally fuller, a hospital gown replaced by a soft t-shirt. "Look," he said, lifting his arm to show the fadding scar. "They say I'll be running again in a few months." She laughed, a sound with more air in it than before. "Don't run too fast," she replied. "Some of us are still catching up." When the call ended, she stayed there for a long moment, watching her reflection in the dark glass of the building. The same eyes, the same hands, a different weight on her shoulders. The night she found that envelope on the 52nd floor, nobody would have blamed her for sliding it into her pocket and never looking back. She was poor, tired, and alone. The world had taught her that people like her were on their own. Instead, she chose the harder thing. She walked toward the source of her fear instead of away from it. She returned money that could have saved her for a little while, and in doing so, she forced a man of power to see the lives his world had been using as floorboards. Because of that one quiet decision, a brother got a new chance at life. A trafficking route was cut. A boss who once thought only of territory now paid for cameras in staff corridors and lawyers to rewrite contracts. Always choose the right thing, especially when it feels small and unseen. That's when it matters most. That's when it's already rewriting a future you can't yet see, for you and for people you don't even know are standing in your shadow. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share this video and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Where in the world are you turning in from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts.